I haven't slept in a room with a ceiling fan in 3 years. Not since the apartment on Lunt Avenue. Even now, if I walk into a restaurant and see those blades chopping the air above me, I have to leave. My throat closes up, and I can taste copper in the back of my mouth. It started on July 14th, right in the middle of that heat wave that hit Chicago. I was desperate. I was 22, broke, and needed a place fast after my roommate bailed on our lease. So when I found a sublet in a 1,930 seconds walk-up in Rogers Park for $850 a month, I didn't ask questions. I just signed the papers and moved my 4 boxes in. The apartment was decent, if a bit run down. Hardwood floors that groaned under my weight, layers of landlord white paint thick enough to round off the corners of the walls, and a smell of old dust and boiled cabbage in the hallway. But the bedroom had one feature that didn't fit the cheap aesthetic: the ceiling fan. It was massive. It looked like an industrial antique, something ripped out of a factory rather than a residential unit. The motor housing was heavy, tarnished brass, the size of a mixing bowl. It held 5 blades, made of dark, solid walnut. Not that cheap particle board you see at Home Depot. It hung low, too low. If I stood on my tiptoes, I felt like I could lose a finger. The first night, the heat was suffocating. My weather app said it was 88 degrees at midnight. I unpacked my sheets, sweating through my t-shirt, and looked at the fan. I flipped the switch on the wall. Nothing. I pulled the chain hanging from the brass housing. Nothing. The thing was dead. Great. Just another broken fixture in a cheap apartment. I groaned, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and opened the window, hoping for a breeze off the lake. Before I crashed, I made sure the wall switch was flipped to the off position, a distinct, loud click, just in case it decided to start working and made a racket while I was sleeping. I woke up at 2:37 a.m. I didn't wake up because of a noise. I woke up because of a shadow. The streetlights from outside were casting a long, distorted silhouette against the peeling paint of my bedroom wall. I lay there, blinking the sleep out of my eyes, staring at the shadow. It was moving. A rhythmic, lazy rotation. Swish. 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 I sat up, my sheets sticking to my back. Above me, the fan was spinning. It wasn't fast, maybe 1 rotation every 2 seconds. Just a slow, heavy drift. I frowned, confusion fighting through my grogginess. I looked at the wall switch. It was still in the down position. OFF. I stared at the heavy walnut blades. They looked heavier in the dark, like iron bars. Draft, I whispered to myself, my voice sounding too loud in the empty room. Must be a draft from the window. I got up, my bare feet sticky on the varnish, and walked over to the window to shut it. The air outside was dead still. Not a leaf was moving on the trees below. I shut the window anyway, locking the latch. I looked back up. The fan was still spinning. Same speed. Same lazy, heavy circle. I felt a prickle of unease on the back of my neck. Irrational, but sharp. Physics says things need force to move. If there was no electricity and no wind, it should be still. I reached up and grabbed one of the blades to stop it. It was cold, freezing cold. The moment I let go, it didn't stay stationary. It immediately began to drift again, resuming its slow, silent rotation, as if it had momentum that I couldn't feel. By morning, I had convinced myself I was an idiot. Daylight has a way of burning off the paranoia of the night, turning what felt like a supernatural event into a simple maintenance issue. I stood there with a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring up at the fan. It was still, dead still. Old wiring, I muttered. Cross connection somewhere. It was the only logical explanation. The building was nearly 100 years old. God knows what kind of rat's nest of copper existed behind the plaster. Maybe the neighbor upstairs turned on their blender and it surged my neutral line. Nonsense. I didn't know much about electricity, but I knew enough to know that ghosts don't pay rent. To prove a point to myself and to the empty room, I went to the kitchen drawer and dug out a roll of heavy-duty silver duct tape. I marched back into the bedroom and slapped 3 thick strips over the light switch, locking it firmly in the off position. "Try spinning now," I said. It felt good to be aggressive, to take control. I left for work at 8 a.m., feeling satisfied. I worked at a logistics center near O'Hare, a job that was mostly staring at spreadsheets and arguing with dispatchers. It was mundane, boring, and grounded in reality. I didn't think about the fan all day. I got back to the apartment at 6:15 p.m. The sun was still up, but the humidity had broken, leaving the air heavy and still. As soon as I unlocked the front door, I felt it. You know that feeling when you walk near an old CRT television that's just been turned on? That prickly static charge that makes the hair on your arm stand up? The air in the hallway felt like that. It tasted metallic, like I was chewing on aluminum foil. I dropped my keys in the bowl. They landed with a dull thud that didn't echo. The silence in the apartment was oppressive. Usually, I could hear the rumble of the L train or traffic on Sheridan Road, but today, the apartment felt insulated, like it was wrapped in cotton. I walked to the bedroom doorway. The duct tape was exactly where I left it. 3 silver strips, peeling slightly at the edges from the heat, holding the switch down. I looked up. The fan was spinning. It wasn't the lazy drift from last night. This was a powered, deliberate rotation. It was moving at a steady, rhythmic pace, what would be the low setting on a normal unit. Whum, whum, whum. I stood frozen in the doorway, my work bag slipping from my shoulder to the floor. There was no sound from the motor, no hum of electricity, no vibration of bearings, just the sound of the heavy walnut blades carving through the thick air. I took a step inside, and the pressure in the room hit me. It wasn't wind, it was density. The air felt solid, resisting my movement. My ears popped, like I was descending rapidly in an airplane. I looked at the fan, then at the taped switch, then back at the fan. I reached out to the wall, my hand shaking just enough to notice. I touched the plaster near the switch. It was warm. Not hot, but fever warm. Okay, I whispered. My voice sounded flat, swallowed by the room. Okay, that's it. I wasn't scared yet, I was angry. This was a fire hazard. This was faulty wiring that was going to burn the building down while I slept. I needed to kill the power at the source. I didn't bother calling the landlord. The guy took 3 weeks to fix a leaky faucet. I wasn't going to trust him with an electrical haunting. I found a guy on TaskRabbit named Miller. He had 5 stars and a profile picture that looked like a mugshot. He showed up at 7 p.m. with a tool belt that looked older than me and a smell of stale Marlboros clinging to his jacket. "Switch is busted," Miller said immediately, listening to my frantic explanation while chewing on a toothpick. "Happens all the time. Contacts fuse together, completes the circuit even when it's off. Easy fix." He walked into the bedroom. The fan was still spinning. Whum, whum, whum. Miller paused. He tilted his head, watching the blades. "Moving pretty good for a low setting," he muttered. He reached up and pulled the chain. Click. Nothing changed. The speed remained constant. Click. Nothing. Miller frowned, the toothpick shifting to the other side of his mouth. "All right. Let's kill it at the box." The breaker panel was in the kitchen, painted over so many times the door barely opened. Miller found the main switch, the one that kills everything in the unit, and yanked it down with a heavy clunk. The apartment died instantly. The hum of the refrigerator cut out. The digital clock on the stove went black. The faint buzz of the city seemed to retreat, leaving us in sudden, heavy silence. "All right," Miller said, clicking his flashlight on. "That kills the feed. Let's go see." We walked back down the hallway. My stomach was in knots. I was praying to see the blades slowing down, drifting to a stop. We rounded the corner. The beam of Miller's flashlight hit the ceiling. It was still spinning. Not drifting, not slowing down. It was maintaining that same powered rhythmic drive. Whum, whum, whum. Miller stopped in the doorway. He lowered his flashlight. That shouldn't be doing that. Maybe it's residual energy? I asked, grasping for words I didn't understand. Momentum? Kid, that's 40 pounds of solid wood and brass. Friction should have stopped it 30 seconds ago. He walked over to the wall switch and unscrewed the faceplate. He pulled a non-contact voltage tester from his belt, one of those yellow pens that beeps when it detects a live wire. He jammed it into the box, touching the black wire. Silence. No beep. He walked to the center of the room, dragged my desk chair over, and stood on it. He held the tester right up against the motor housing of the fan, inches from the spinning blades. Silence. "There's no juice," Miller whispered. He sounded offended, like the fan was insulting his trade. "There is zero electricity running to this fixture." He climbed down slowly. He didn't look at me. He was packing his tools away, but his movements were jerky, fast. He dropped a screwdriver, and when he bent to pick it up, I saw his hand shaking. "Mr. Miller? I can't fix this," he said. He zipped up his bag. "But you didn't. I can't fix it because it's not broken," he snapped. He looked at the fan one last time, and I saw genuine fear in his eyes, not confusion. Fear. "It's working fine. It just ain't using power." He headed for the door. "Wait, I have to pay you," I said, reaching for my wallet. Miller opened the front door and stepped out into the hallway without looking back.
Stay back.
"Keep your money. Get out of here, kid. I'm serious. Just leave." He slammed the door. I heard his heavy boots thumping down the stairs, taking them two at a time. I turned back to the bedroom. The fan was still spinning in the dark. I couldn't stay in the apartment, but I couldn't leave either. It's that stupid, paralyzed logic of being poor. Where was I gonna go? A hotel I couldn't afford? A friend's couch at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday? I told myself Miller was just a superstitious old man. I told myself there was a logical explanation involving magnets or some weird structural vibration from the L train tracks. I decided to sleep on the living room couch. It was as far away from the bedroom as I could get. I shut the bedroom door firmly, hearing the latch click, sealing that thing away in the dark. I watched TV until my eyes burned, volume up high to drown out the silence. I passed out around 1 a.m. with the remote still in my hand. I woke up at 3 a.m. sharp. The silence was gone. At first, I thought it was wind, a high-pitched whistling keen, like a gale forcing its way through a crack in a window, but it was steady, constant. I sat up. The living room was dark, illuminated only by the standby light of the TV. I looked down the hallway. The bedroom door was vibrating. Not shaking, vibrating. A high-frequency tremble that made the brass doorknob blur slightly in the gloom. I stood up, my legs feeling like they were filled with water. I didn't want to go closer. Every instinct in my reptilian brain was screaming run, screaming to grab my keys and sprint into the street barefoot. But the curiosity, that morbid, human need to see, pulled me forward. I crept down the hallway. The sound got louder. It wasn't a mechanical whir anymore. It was the sound of air being sliced apart, violent, fast. I reached the door. I could feel the cold radiating through the wood, like standing next to an open freezer. I put my hand on the knob. It was freezing, painful to the touch. I turned it and pushed. The door flew open, ripped from my hand by a sudden change in pressure. The wind hit me first, a cyclonic blast of freezing air that threw my hair back and made my eyes water. Then I saw it. The fan was a blur. It was spinning so fast the individual blades had vanished. It was just a solid, translucent disc of gray motion near the ceiling. It had to be doing 1,000 RPMs. Maybe more. No residential fan spins that fast. The motor should have burned out. The bearings should have seized. The housing should have ripped from the drywall. But it held, and it was silent. The motor made no noise, no hum, no grind. The only sound was the air itself screaming as it was torn to shreds. I took a step back, shielding my face from the wind. The papers on my desk were pinned against the walls by the centrifugal force. My bedsheets were whipped into a frenzy, twisting and nodding like they were alive. But the worst part wasn't the speed. It was the feeling in the room. The air didn't just feel heavy anymore. It felt hostile. I tried to back out, to close the door, but the air pressure was weird. It felt like the room was inhaling, pulling me in. I had to grab the doorframe to steady myself. "Stop!" I yelled, the wind snatching the word from my mouth. The pitch of the wind shifted. It didn't slow down. It just changed. The screaming air dropped an octave. It sounded deeper, wetter. The sound change was visceral. It went from a high-pitched aerodynamic whistle to something thick and rhythmic. Thwack, 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 thwack. It sounded exactly like a butcher's cleaver hitting a wet cutting board, repeated 1,000 times a second. I covered my ears, but the sound vibrated in my chest cavity. It was a heavy, resonant thudding that I could feel in my teeth. Then the smell hit me. It wafted out of the bedroom on the artificial gale the fan was creating. It wasn't the ozone smell of an overheated motor or burning dust. It was organic, copper, strong, sharp copper. The unmistakable metallic tang of fresh blood. Beneath that, something sweeter. Rotting flowers. The kind they pile on graves that have sat in the sun too long. I gagged, pulling the collar of my shirt up over my nose. The smell was so thick it felt like it was coating the back of my throat. I squinted into the room, fighting the wind that was drying my eyes out. The fan was still a blur, but the air circulating around it seemed darker. A fine mist appeared to be spinning off the blades, like water spraying from a wet tire. I watched a droplet hit the white wall near the doorframe. It was red, a small, dark crimson splatter. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the ceiling. There were no pipes up there. No upstairs neighbor bleeding through the floorboards. The liquid was coming from the fan, flinging off the blades as if they were cutting through an invisible carcass suspended in the air. Another drop hit my cheek. I wiped it away instinctively, looking at my fingers. They were smeared with red. It was warm, viscous. I stumbled back into the hallway, wiping my hand frantically on my pajama pants. No, I stammered. No. I needed to see. I needed to know if I was losing my mind. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the flashlight Miller had left on the counter. He'd forgotten it in his rush to leave. I ran back to the bedroom doorway, not crossing the threshold, and clicked it on. I aimed the beam at the ceiling. The light cut through the spinning blur. For a split second, the strobe effect of the moving blades against the light played a trick on my eyes. The blades weren't walnut anymore. They looked like bone. Long, jagged shards of yellowed bone, fused together at the center by something pulsing and wet. The image lasted a fraction of a second before the blur swallowed it again. But the red mist was undeniable now. A ring of fine crimson spray was painting a perfect circle on the ceiling and the upper walls. The room wasn't just inhaling anymore. It was feeding. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Panic makes you stupid. It bypasses the logical parts of your brain that say leave the building, and hotwires the primitive part that says fight the threat. I couldn't just leave that thing spinning. It felt like if I left, whatever was happening in that room would spread out into the hall, then the building, then the city. It needed to be stopped physically. I ran to the kitchen closet and grabbed the broom. It was an old school one, with a thick, solid pine handle, not one of those flimsy plastic Swiffers. It felt heavy in my hands, a weapon. I marched back to the bedroom. The copper smell was so strong now I could taste it on my tongue, like I'd been sucking on a penny. The mist was settling on my skin, leaving a tacky, humid film. I stepped into the room. The pressure was immense. It felt like walking into a wind tunnel, but the air wasn't just moving. It was heavy. It pushed against my chest, making it hard to draw a full breath. My eyes watered from the gale. "Stop!" I screamed again, swinging the broom handle upward like a baseball bat. My plan was simple. Jam the wood between the blades. At that speed, the wood should shatter the blades, or at least jam the motor housing and force it to seize. It was basic physics. Solid object meets spinning object. I thrust the handle up into the gray blur. Crack. It didn't sound like wood breaking. It sounded like a gunshot. The force of the impact threw me backward into the doorframe. My shoulders slammed against the wood, knocking the wind out of me. I fell to the floor, gasping. I looked down at my hands. I was holding a jagged stump of pine, maybe 6 inches long. The rest of the broom, 3 feet of solid wood, had been pulverized. But it wasn't just pulverized. A sharp, hot pain seared through my left forearm. I looked down. A shard of the broom handle, about the size of a steak knife, was buried 2 inches deep in the meat of my arm, just below the elbow. I didn't scream. I was too shocked. I just stared at the splinter, watching my own bright red blood pulse out around the entry wound, mixing with the dark, sticky mist that coated my skin. Then I looked up. The fan hadn't stopped. It hadn't even slowed down. There was no damage to the blades, no debris. It was as if the wood had simply ceased to exist the moment it touched that spinning circle. And then, the sound changed again. The wet, chopping rhythm accelerated. Thwack, 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 thwack. It was getting faster. The wind picked up, howling now. The papers that were pinned to the walls began to shred, tearing themselves apart from the sheer friction of the air. The heavy oak dresser in the corner groaned, shifting an inch across the floor. I gripped my injured arm, feeling the warm slickness of blood between my fingers. The pain finally hit me, a nausea-inducing throb that made my vision swim. I had attacked it, and it had noticed. The center of the room, directly under the fan, began to darken. The shadows weren't being cast by anything. They were gathering there, a swirling vortex of black dust and red mist. I scrambled backward on my heels, kicking at the floor to get away, dragging my bleeding arm against the hallway wall. I stumbled out of my apartment, slamming the front door behind me. I didn't care about the keys or my wallet. I just needed a wall between me and that room. I collapsed in the hallway, clutching my forearm. The shard of pine was still sticking out of my flesh, pulsing with every heartbeat. I bit down on my lip to keep from screaming, tasting blood that was actually mine this time. The hallway was quiet, but the floor beneath me was humming. A low, constant vibration that traveled up through the linoleum and into my spine. Even through the heavy fire door of my unit, I could hear it. A dull, muffled thrum, thrum, thrum. You hear it too, don't you? The voice made me jump. I scrambled backward, smearing a streak of blood on the pale yellow wall. The door to 4B, the unit directly across from mine, was cracked open. A chain lock kept it from opening fully, but a slice of face was visible in the gap. It was an old woman. Her skin was like crumpled parchment, and one eye was clouded with a cataract. The helicopter, she whispered. It's landing again. I need a doctor, I gasped, holding up my bleeding arm. My fan. It broke. She didn't look at my arm. She was staring past me, at my front door. She sniffed the air. Smells like copper, she said, and wet earth. Please, I begged. Do you have a phone? I left mine inside. She ignored the request. The chain rattled as she shifted. The boy before you, David. He was a nice boy. Quiet. My blood ran cold, temporarily overriding the pain in my arm. What happened to him? Police said he hung himself, she said, her tone flat, bored even. Said he tied a belt to the fan and kicked the chair away. She paused, her good eye locking onto mine. It was sharp, lucid, and terrifyingly calm. But I saw him when they brought him out. The gurney bumped the railing. The sheet slipped. She leaned closer to the gap in the door. You can't hang yourself from a spinning fan, dear. It throws you off. David didn't have a rope burn. His head was on backward. His chin was resting on his spine. She made a twisting motion with her withered hands. Snap. Just like a doll. I stared at her, the hallway spinning slightly. It doesn't want you to hang, she whispered. It wants to catch you. It wants to pull you up. She finally looked at my neck. Her gaze lingered on my throat, dissecting it. A look of pity, or maybe resignation, crossed her face. You have a long neck, she observed. Just like David. Help me, I whispered, my voice breaking. No, she said. I don't want it to hear me. She pulled the door shut. I heard the deadbolt slide home, then the scratch of a chair being dragged against the door from the inside. I was alone in the hallway. The vibration from my apartment was getting stronger. The thrum, thrum, thrum was speeding up, rising in pitch. And then, from behind my locked door, came a sound that made my bladder release. It was the sound of the deadbolt on my door clicking, slowly, deliberately, unlocking from the inside. The door didn't just unlock. It swung inward, sucked open by the vacuum pressure inside the apartment. The noise hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a wall of frequency. A high-pitched, screaming tear that sounded like a jet engine inhaling a flock of birds. My phone was lying on the hallway runner rug, just inside the threshold where I dropped it during my panic. I needed it. I needed to call 911. My arm was throbbing with a sickening hot rhythm, and blood was dripping steadily onto the floorboards. I crawled forward, fighting the suction. The air was rushing into the apartment, flowing past me, dragging my clothes, my hair, even the loose skin on my face toward the bedroom. I grabbed the phone. My thumb smeared blood across the screen as I unlocked it. I should have dialed 911. I know that. But as I looked up from the floor, down the short hallway, into the bedroom, I froze. The fan was glowing. Not with electricity, the power was still cut. It was a friction burn. The air around the blades was ionizing, creating a faint violet aura around the spinning disc. It was mesmerizing, terrifying. I lifted the phone. My hands were shaking so bad the image on the screen jittered, but I switched the camera to slow-mo. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to see what had broken the broom. Maybe I wanted proof before I died. Maybe the noise had just scrambled my brain. I held it up, aiming through the doorway at the ceiling, and hit the red button. I recorded for 6 seconds. The wind roared over the microphone, peaking the audio into digital static. I hit stop. Then I tapped the thumbnail to view it. I scrubbed the timeline, slowing the footage down to a crawl. On the small OLED screen, the blur of the room resolved into grainy, high frame rate clarity. I gasped, dropping the phone onto my chest. It wasn't a fan. The video played back in eerie silence. In the footage, the blur of the blades separated. They weren't wood, they were limbs. Human arms. Gray, elongated, and emaciated, rotating around the central brass hub. They were joined at the shoulders in a fleshy, pulsing mass where the motor should be. The hands, fingers, impossibly long and multi-jointed, were clawing at the air, pulling the entity around in a circle. I watched, paralyzed, as the slow-motion video showed one of the hands snatch a piece of paper from the air and shred it with razor-sharp fingernails. And then, at the 04 mark of the video, the face appeared. It was in the center of the hub, a blur of motion that the camera barely caught. It was upside down, looking at the floor. Its mouth was open in a scream that matched the wind. But its eyes. In the video, for a split second, the eyes looked directly at the camera lens. They were white. No pupils. Just milky, dead white. And they were looking at me. I looked up from the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. The violet aura in the bedroom was brighter now. And the sound had stopped being a scream. It was laughing. A wet, chopping, mechanical laughter. The laughter wasn't coming from a mouth. It was the sound of the blades changing pitch, up and down, creating a sonic mimicry of a human chuckle. He 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 he. I scrambled backward, crab walking away from the open door, my heels digging into the cheap hallway carpet. My arm was on fire, the wood splinter feeling like it was twisting inside the muscle every time I moved. But the physics of the apartment were breaking down. It started with the small things. The keys I had dropped on the hallway table didn't slide off. They lifted. They floated 3 inches into the air, jangling softly, before shooting straight into the bedroom like they were fired from a slingshot. Ping. I heard them hit the brass housing of the fan. Then the rug I was sitting on began to move. It wasn't just suction anymore. It was gravity. The center of gravity in the apartment had shifted. It was no longer the floor. It was the ceiling of the bedroom. I grabbed the doorframe of the bathroom, my fingers slipping on the painted wood. My legs swung out from under me, pulled toward the bedroom doorway. The air was cold, absolute zero cold. My breath came out in thick white plumes. I looked into the bedroom. The walls were bowing inward. The drywall was cracking, popping rivets with sounds like gunfire. The floorboards were groaning, nails screeching as they were pulled upward. The fan was a solid disc of violet light now. The vibrations were shaking the entire building. I could hear dust raining down inside the walls. Let go, the wind seemed to whisper. Not a voice, but a suggestion, planted directly in the base of my skull. Just let go. It's easier. I looked at my phone, still clutched in my right hand. The screen was cracked, but the flashlight was on. The beam cut through the gloom and hit my desk in the bedroom. My heavy oak desk, probably 200 pounds of furniture lifted off the floor. It hovered for a second, rotating slowly, before it was sucked upward. It hit the fan. Crash. It didn't shatter the fan. The desk exploded. It was instantly atomized into a cloud of sawdust and splinters. The fan didn't even waver. It just ate the oak. But the impact did something else. It destabilized the mounting bracket. The ceiling plaster around the base of the fan began to crumble. A massive crack, jagged and dark, spiderwebbed across the ceiling. The fan wasn't just spinning anymore. It was descending. The metal junction box inside the ceiling groaned, the steel screws stripping from the joists. The head of the thing, that pulsing fleshy hub, dropped 3 inches. Then 6. It wasn't falling. It was lowering itself. It was coming down to floor level. The vacuum increased. I felt my grip on the doorframe slipping. My fingernails dug into the wood, tearing backward. The blood from my arm wasn't dripping down anymore. It was streaming sideways, drawn in a straight red line toward the bedroom. I was bleeding into it, feeding it from 20 feet away. The sound of the ceiling giving way was the loudest thing I have ever heard. It wasn't a crack. It was a structural scream. The lath and plaster, weakened by the vibrations and the impossible gravity, exploded downward. A cloud of white dust billowed out of the bedroom, instantly sucked into the vortex of the spinning blades. I watched, paralyzed in the hallway, as the heavy brass housing tore free from the joist. It should have fallen. It should have crashed to the floor, shattering the blades and ending the nightmare. Gravity is a law, it's not a suggestion. But the fan didn't fall. It hung there, suspended in the center of the room, about 4 feet off the ground. The electrical wires, thick, armored BX cable, were stretched tight, holding it like a leash. Sparks showered down as the metal casing of the cable snapped, but the copper wires inside held. The fan tilted. Slowly, deliberately, the spinning disc of bone and brass rotated on its axis until it was vertical. It was no longer a ceiling fan. It was a wheel, a buzzsaw facing the doorway, facing me. The violet light flared, brighter now, casting long, frantic shadows down the hallway. The limbs that made up the blades were blurring into a solid gray ring of motion. Then, the wires snapped. Ping, ping, ping. The fan didn't drop. It floated. It drifted forward, bobbing slightly in the air currents it was creating. The sound changed again. The wet chopping noise became a deep, resonant thrum, like a predator growling deep in its throat. It began to move toward the bedroom door. I scrambled backward, abandoning the bathroom door frame. I didn't care about the pain in my arm anymore. Adrenaline is a hell of a drug. It turned the agony into a cold, hard clarity. Get out. I threw myself toward the front door of the apartment. I grabbed the deadbolt, my blood-slicked fingers slipping on the brass. I twisted it. I yanked the handle. It wouldn't budge. The pressure differential was too great. The apartment had become a vacuum chamber. The heavy steel fire door was sealed against the frame by thousands of pounds of atmospheric pressure pushing from the hallway. It was like trying to open the emergency exit of a plane at 30,000 feet. I braced my foot against the wall and pulled with both hands, screaming with effort. The veins in my neck bulged. The wood of the door groaned, but the seal held. Behind me, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It was the sound of the brass motor housing dragging against the hallway walls. The hallway was narrow, the fan was wide. I turned around, my back pressed against the unyielding front door. The fan had exited the bedroom. It was in the hallway. It was squeezing itself forward. The tips of the spinning blades were carving deep gouges into the drywall on both sides, shredding the plaster, sending clouds of white dust and pink insulation into the air. It was eating the apartment to get to me. It moved slowly, methodically. It wasn't rushing. It knew I was trapped. The eye, that milky, dead white eye I had seen on the phone, was visible in the center of the hub. It was locked onto me. There was nowhere to go. The hallway was a dead end. To my right was the kitchen, no exit. To my left, the living room. The living room. The window. It was my only chance. But to get to the living room, I had to run past the hallway opening. I had to get closer to it before I could get away. The fan revved. The pitch climbed. It lunged forward, eating 3 feet of hallway in a second. I didn't think. Thought is too slow. I let the reptilian part of my brain take the wheel. The part that doesn't care about dignity or pain, only about not dying. I dropped to my stomach and scrambled. I dove toward the living room archway just as the fan lunged. I felt the wind of its passing, a razor-sharp gust that sliced the back of my t-shirt open. The sound was deafening. A high-pitched scream of metal hitting wood as the blade sheared the corner of the wall off. Drywall dust exploded like a bomb, blinding me. I rolled into the living room, coughing up white powder, and scrambled to my feet. The living room was a disaster zone. The vacuum pressure was pulling everything toward the hallway. Books, cushions, and lamps were tumbling past me, sucked into the maw of the thing behind me. I looked back. The fan was turning the corner. It didn't pivot like a machine. It banked like a shark. The brass housing tilted. The blade struck the floor, carving deep, smoking furrows into the hardwood, sending splinters shooting like shrapnel. It righted itself, hovering at chest height, the white eye in the center fixing on me again. It revved. The thrum 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 accelerated into a continuous roar. It was preparing to charge. The window! I gasped, stumbling backward over the coffee table. I turned and ran for the bay window overlooking Lunt Avenue. It was a massive, 3-paneled thing, painted shut by decades of lazy landlords. I grabbed the latch. It was fused with layers of white gloss. I yanked it, screaming, but it didn't budge. Behind me, I heard the destruction. The fan had hit the sofa. There was a wet, tearing sound as the blades chewed through upholstery, foam, and wooden frame in seconds. It was eating its way toward me. I looked around frantically. My eyes landed on my grandmother's heavy ceramic lamp on the end table. I grabbed it by the base, ripping the cord from the wall. I swung it with everything I had left. Crash. The sound of breaking glass was beautiful. The heavy ceramic shattered the center pane, sending jagged shards raining down onto the sidewalk below. The humid Chicago night air rushed in, hot and thick, clashing with the freezing vacuum of the apartment. I didn't hesitate. I didn't look for a safe landing. I just needed out. I climbed onto the sill. A shard of glass sliced into my palm, but I didn't feel it. I felt something else. A cold, wet grip on my ankle. I looked down. The fan was 5 feet away. But the mist, the red, sticky mist spinning off the blades, had solidified. It had formed a tendril, a long smoky rope of blood and air, and it had wrapped around my leg. It pulled. I slipped, my chest hitting the windowsill. I clawed at the brickwork outside, my fingernails breaking. The pull was incredibly strong, dragging me back into the room, back toward the spinning gray circle of bone and teeth. "No!" I screamed, kicking wildly with my other foot. My heel connected with something solid, the brass housing of the fan. It felt like kicking a freezer block. The impact jarred my leg up to the hip, but it broke the connection. The fan wobbled, dipping slightly. The smoky grip on my ankle dissipated. I pushed off the sill and threw myself into the night. For a second, I was weightless. The humidity wrapped around me like a blanket. Then, gravity remembered me. I fell 2 stories. I missed the dumpster by 3 feet and hit the concrete alleyway. I heard the snap before I felt the pain. My right leg, the tibia, gave way with a sickening crunch. My head slammed against the pavement, and the world dissolved into a shower of white stars. I lay there, gasping, unable to scream because the air had been knocked out of me. I rolled onto my back, staring up at the broken window of my apartment. The fan was there. It was hovering right at the jagged opening of the shattered glass. The blades were spinning slowly now, just a lazy drift. The white eye looked down at me from the darkness of the room. It stayed there for a heartbeat, watching. Then, slowly, it retreated back into the shadows. I blacked out. I spent 6 weeks in Street Francis Hospital. 3 surgeries to reconstruct my tibia with titanium pins, and 4 sessions with a court-appointed psychiatrist who tried to tell me that stress-induced psychosis is a common side effect of heat stroke. According to the police report, there was no blood in the apartment, no bone shards, no gray, emaciated limbs. Just a destroyed room, a shattered window, and a ceiling fan hanging harmlessly from its mounts, disconnected from the power. They claimed I had taken a sledgehammer to the walls and furniture in a manic episode. The landlord sued me for $4,000 in damages. I paid it. I would have paid double just to never hear that address again. I live in a garden unit in Andersonville now. It's a basement apartment, half submerged in the earth. It's dark, damp, and smells like mildew. But I don't mind. There are no ceiling fixtures here, no overhead lighting at all. I use floor lamps. If I walk into a room and see a fixture on the ceiling, I can't breathe. I have to leave. I still have the video on my phone. I haven't shown it to anyone. I know what they'd say. It's a glitch, a filter, a deep fake. But I watch it sometimes, late at night, when the insomnia gets too bad to fight. I've analyzed it frame by frame. I was wrong about what I saw that night. The hands in the blur. They weren't trying to hold onto the rotor. They weren't trying to spin it. They were prying. They weren't trying to spin it. They were prying. They were clawing at the air, pulling the fabric of the room apart. The fan wasn't a weapon. It was a drill. It was using centrifugal force to thin the barrier between here and there until it snapped. That's why the pressure dropped. That's why the room went cold. It wasn't creating wind. It was creating a vacuum to suck something in. Or maybe, to suck me out. I thought I escaped. I thought breaking the window and hitting the pavement was the end of it. But lately, I'm not so sure. It's been hot again this week. The air is thick, humid, heavy. Yesterday, I was sitting on my couch, reading. My unit has central air, and the vents are located near the floor. The AC kicked on with a low mechanical hum, and my ears popped. It was subtle, but I felt it. That sudden drop in pressure, that feeling of being underwater. I looked at my floor lamp. The bulb flickered. And then, I smelled it. Just a faint whiff, drifting out of the AC vent. Copper. And wet, rotting flowers. I don't think the fan was the source. I think the fan was just the key. And now that the door has been cracked open, it doesn't matter where I go. It doesn't matter if there's a fan on the ceiling or not. The air itself remembers me. I'm writing this now because the pressure in my ears isn't going away. The humming from the vents is getting louder, deeper. It's starting to sound like a chant. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to stand in the middle of this street until the sun comes up. Because I know now what that eye in the center of the fan was looking for. It wasn't hunting. It was harvesting. And I don't think it's full yet.